The laser cutter sliced through the ancient vines with a satisfying hiss, sending the sweet scent of burnt vegetation into the humid air. Raman Nightingale Kane wiped sweat from his brow and squinted at the massive stone doorway emerging from the undergrowth. The Temple of 1,000 Winds loomed before him, its weathered facade telling stories of millennia past. "You know," Raman said, holstering his cutter, "sometimes I wonder why these temples always have to be in the most godforsaken corners of the galaxy." Behind him, a sleek metallic drone hovered, its optical sensor glowing a sardonic blue. Padawan, portable automated data analyzer with advanced navigation, emitted a short mechanical sigh. "Perhaps, sir, because if they weren't, someone would have looted them centuries ago. Much like you're attempting to do now." Raman shot the drone a look. "It's not looting. It's historical redistribution." "Ah yes," Padawan replied, "the noble profession of historical redistribution. I'm sure that's what they'll engrave on your prison cell should we fail spectacularly, which my calculations put at a 78% probability." Zora's 3 sons beat down mercilessly as Raman approached the temple entrance. Sweat plastered his raven hair to his forehead, and his stealth suit, designed for space stations and urban environments, felt like an oven in this jungle climate. The massive stone door stood half open, excavation equipment scattered around its base. Fresh boot prints marked the muddy ground. "Well," Raman muttered, "looks like we've got competition." Padawan scanned the area, his processors whirring. The Crimson Syndicate, based on equipment signatures. They arrived approximately 3 hours ago. Would you like me to calculate your diminishing chances of success now? Pass. Raman drew his blaster and approached the entrance cautiously. He'd tangled with the Crimson Syndicate before, professional thieves and murderers with a penchant for leaving no witnesses. "What I need," he whispered, "is a distraction." As if summoned by his words, 2 figures emerged from the temple, female humanoids with the distinctive crimson jumpsuits of the Syndicate's lower-ranking members. One had the azure skin of a Thyan, the other displayed the slight ridges along her neck that marked her as Valuan. Both carried standard-issue ion rifles. Raman holstered his blaster and stepped into plain view, a charming smile spreading across his face. "Ladies, what a pleasant surprise. I thought I was the only one who appreciated ancient architecture in this sector." The Thyan immediately raised her weapon, but the Valuan laid a hand on her companion's arm, her eyes moving appreciatively over Raman's form. "You know, you look familiar," the Valuan said, her voice carrying the distinctive musical lilt of her species. Raman stepped closer, hands visible. "I have that kind of face. Trustworthy, wouldn't you say?" Padawan hovered nearby, emitting a barely audible electronic groan. "Oh, here we go again. Might I remind you, sir, that your last romantic entanglement resulted in us being shot at by no fewer than 17 mercenaries?" Raman ignored the drone, focusing instead on the warming expressions of the guards. 20 minutes, several outrageous compliments, and one invented story about being an independent researcher later, he was walking into the temple with both women, who had introduced themselves as Terra and Kel. "The boss would skin us alive if he knew we were showing you around," Terra, the Thyan, whispered, having warmed considerably to the charming intruder. "Your secret's safe with me," Raman assured her while mentally cataloging the temple's layout, security measures, and the syndicate members' positions. Padawan followed silently, occasionally scanning the ancient writings on the walls and transmitting the data directly to Raman's neural implant. Temple of the Stellar Empress. Warnings of divine retribution. Guardians of the Eternal Flame. The translation scrolled across Raman's vision. "So what exactly are you looking for in here?" Kel asked, brushing against Raman's arm as they navigated a narrow corridor. "Oh, just historical curiosities, nothing valuable," he lied smoothly. "I'm particularly interested in the central chamber. I've heard there's a remarkable statue there." "There is," Terra confirmed, "but the boss has been trying to extract something from it for hours. Some kind of crystal embedded in the stonework." "The Tear of Infinity," Raman thought triumphantly. His client had offered a small fortune for the artifact, enough to clear his debts and live comfortably for a standard year. The corridor opened into a vast circular chamber, its domed ceiling reaching at least 30 meters overhead. Shafts of sunlight pierced through strategic openings, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. The walls were covered with intricate carvings depicting battles among the stars, species Raman had never seen, and celestial phenomena that defied explanation. But what commanded the room was the statue. Standing at least 4 meters tall on a raised dais, it depicted a woman of unearthly beauty. Her skin was a soft jade green, smooth as polished stone yet detailed enough to suggest the subtle musculature beneath. Her face was proud, regal, with high cheekbones and full lips curved in what might have been a knowing smile. Short, sleek black hair framed her face in a perfect bob, each strand seeming to catch the light independently. She wore armor that resembled a blend of ancient Earth samurai designs and something altogether alien, form-fitting yet clearly built for war. In her outstretched palm rested a teardrop-shaped crystal that seemed to contain a galaxy within its facets, stars and nebulae swirling in its depths. "Magnificent, isn't she?" came a gruff voice. Raman tore his gaze from the statue to see a burly man with cybernetic enhancements covering half his face. Corvin Drace, leader of this particular Crimson Syndicate cell, and a notorious collector of artifacts, particularly those he could sell to the highest bidder. "Drace," Raman acknowledged with false cheerfulness. "What a pleasant surprise." "Kane," Drace spat. "I should have known you'd slither your way in here. Still trading on that pretty face to manipulate my people?" Tara and Kel looked between the men, confusion dawning on their faces. "You know each other?" Kel asked. "Unfortunately," Drace growled. "This man is Raman Nightingale Kane, and he's here to steal what we're after." Raman shrugged, dropping the pretense. "In my defense, I was planning to steal it before I knew you were here. Purely coincidental conflict of interest." "Restrain him," Drace ordered. 4 more syndicate members emerged from the shadows, weapons trained on Raman. Padawan hovered higher, his circuits humming with tension. "Sir, might I suggest a tactical retreat? These odds are particularly unfavorable. Now Padawan, where's your sense of adventure?" Raman's eyes darted around the chamber, calculating. "Besides, I haven't gotten what I came for yet." Drace laughed, the sound echoing off the ancient stones. "The Tear of Infinity? Good luck with that. We've been trying to extract it for hours. The damn thing won't budge from the statue's hand." Raman was escorted at gunpoint to the base of the statue. Up close, the craftsmanship was even more extraordinary, every detail perfect, from the creases in the armor to the eyelashes that seemed ready to flutter. "I've tried laser cutters, molecular disruptors, even good old-fashioned explosives," Drace explained, gesturing to scorch marks on the statue's arm. "Nothing. It's like the stone absorbs energy." Raman studied the statue's base, noticing an inscription carved in an ancient script. His neural implants struggled to translate the symbols, offering only fragments: "Speak her name, awaken, the Emperor, eternal bond." "What does this say?" Raman asked, pointing to the inscription. Drace shrugged. "Some religious nonsense. Our linguists think it's a prayer or warning. Nothing useful." "Sir," Padawan interjected, "I've cross-referenced the partial translation with my historical database. This appears to be a reference to the stellar Empress Amida Azria, a figure from approximately 1,320 standard years ago." "Amida Azria," Raman repeated thoughtfully, the name rolling off his tongue with surprising ease. The chamber fell silent. Then a sound like cracking ice, soft at first, then crescendoing. All eyes turned to the statue as a hairline fracture appeared across its surface. "What did you do?" Drace demanded, backing away. The statue's eyelids, previously closed in serene repose, slowly opened. Emerald eyes, glowing with an inner light, blinked once, then focused directly on Raman. Holy! Someone whispered. The crack spread across the statue's surface, sheets of stone falling away to reveal living green skin beneath. The woman, no longer stone but flesh, inhaled deeply, her chest rising with her first breath in a millennium. Gratias tibua pro vocem ex somno, she said, her voice melodious yet powerful, echoing throughout the chamber. Thank you for awakening me from my slumber. Padawan's processors whirred frantically. Sir, this is most unexpected. My catastrophe probability calculations have just reached 97.3%. Raman stood transfixed as the woman, Ami, stepped down from her pedestal, her movements fluid and graceful as a dancer's. She was shorter now, perhaps 180 centimeters, but her presence filled the chamber. The tear of infinity remained clutched in her hand. You, she said, pointing directly at Raman, spoke my name. Nen meum in or tua, my name in your mouth. Her perfect lips curved into a smile that was both alluring and predatory. Do you know what that means according to the ancient laws? Before Raman could answer, Drace stepped forward, his cybernetic eye glowing red with avarice. The crystal, he demanded. Hand it over, whatever you are. Ami turned to him, her expression shifting from warmth to cold disdain in an instant. Sentium vermis, she said dismissively. Silence, worm. She made a subtle gesture with her free hand. Drace's body lifted from the ground, suspended by an invisible force. His eyes widened in terror as he clawed at his throat. I do not speak to lesser beings, Ami stated calmly, as though commenting on the weather. Especially those who would defile my temple. With another casual gesture, she sent Drace flying across the chamber. He crashed into a stone column with a sickening crunch and slid to the floor, unmoving. The remaining syndicate members raised their weapons but hesitated, clearly terrified. Please, Raman interjected quickly, there's no need for more violence. I'm sure we can resolve this peacefully. Ami turned back to him, her terrifying aura instantly replaced by one of warmth and something akin to affection. Paces amore, she said softly. A lover of peace. Admirable. And your name, came one who woke me. Raman Kane, he replied, though some call me Nightingale. Nightingale, she repeated, the word sounding exotic in her accent. A singing bird from Terra, is it not? How appropriate, a beautiful voice that awakens the sleeping goddess. Goddess? Raman echoed. Sir, Padawan interrupted, my historical database suggests that Amida Azria was worshipped as a deity on 47 known worlds before her mysterious disappearance. She was also known as the Conqueror of Stars, the Jade Empress, and, oh dear, the Destroyer of Worlds. The remaining syndicate members finally found their courage, or desperation, and opened fire. Energy bolts streaked toward Ami, who didn't even turn to acknowledge the attack. The bolts simply vanished upon reaching her, as if absorbed into her being. Irritant muse, she muttered. Annoying flies. With a casual wave of her hand, the attackers were thrown against the walls of the chamber, their weapons crumbling to dust. Now, she said, returning her attention to Raman, as I was saying, according to the ancient laws of my people, the one who speaks my true name and awakens me from eternal slumber becomes my lord and my husband. Raman blinked. I'm sorry, did you say husband? Etam Kuyung's muse, she confirmed, a smile playing on her lips as she stepped closer to him. My husband, my master, the one to whom I am eternally bound. She stood before him now, close enough that he could see the subtle variations in her jade skin, smell a scent like starlight in distant galaxies. The tear of infinity glowed between them, casting prismatic lights across both their faces. This is what you came for, is it not? She asked, holding up the crystal. Well, yes, Raman admitted, but I usually prefer to at least buy a woman dinner before marriage proposals enter the conversation. Ami laughed, a sound like crystal bells. Your era's customs are charming, but our bond transcends such trivial courtships. You spoke my name, you broke my curse. Now I am yours, and you are mine. Padawan hovered nervously. Sir, I feel compelled to point out that interspecies marriages, especially to beings of unknown origin and questionable divinity status, aren't covered in your health insurance policy. Not helpful, Padawan, Raman muttered. A low rumble interrupted them, the temple floor trembling beneath their feet. What's happening? Raman asked, grabbing a column for support. Ami's expression turned serious. My awakening has triggered ancient safeguards, she tilted her head as if listening to something beyond human hearing, and my enemies have been alerted to my return. Enemies? Raman repeated. What enemies? The ones who betrayed me, the ones who sealed me in stone for 1,000 years. Her eyes flashed with a dangerous light. They rule your galaxy now, under different names, different faces, but I would know their essence anywhere. The rumbling intensified. Dust and small stones began to fall from the ceiling. We need to leave, Raman decided, grabbing Ami's arm. Now. To his surprise, she allowed herself to be led, following him toward the exit. The syndicate members who were still conscious were already fleeing. Padawan, find us the fastest route out of here, Raman ordered. Already calculated, sir, though I must note that us now apparently includes an ancient deity with homicidal tendencies and a penchant for impromptu marriages. As they reached the temple entrance, the sky above had darkened, not with clouds, but with the unmistakable silhouette of a massive starship entering the atmosphere. Fear Imperial hunters, Ami said grimly. They've come for me, and now for you as well, my nightingale. Raman stared at the ship, then at the beautiful, dangerous woman beside him, then at the crystal she still held, the prize he'd come for, now seemingly insignificant compared to the complications he'd unleashed. You know, he said with a wry smile, when I woke up this morning, I was just planning to steal a priceless artifact and retire to a beach somewhere. Ami's lips curved upward. And instead you've stolen a goddess and ignited a war that will engulf the stars. She touched his face with surprising tenderness. Fortuna oisuit, fortune favors the bold, my husband. Padawan's lights blinked rapidly. Correction, fortune favors those with escape plans, which at present we lack. The Imperial ship was descending rapidly, weapon systems clearly charging. Raman took a deep breath. Well then, let's make one up as we go, shall we? Above them, the massive vessel's shadow grew larger, and with it, the weight of destiny that Raman had inadvertently stumbled into. He'd come seeking treasure and found something far more valuable, and infinitely more dangerous. As he looked at Ami, her jade skin glowing with inner power, he realized that his life as a simple thief had ended the moment he spoke her name. Now he was bound to a goddess, marked by the Empire, and about to be caught in a war that had been brewing for over a millennium. And somehow, impossibly, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The Imperial hunter ship's landing thrusters kicked up a maelstrom of dust and debris. Raman grabbed Ami's hand and yanked her into the dense jungle foliage as the craft's searchlight swept across the temple entrance. Your plan is to hide in vegetation? Ami asked, one eyebrow raised skeptically, from beings who can track quantum signatures across galaxies. Raman ducked lower as armored figures began descending from the ship. No, my plan is to buy us 30 seconds to come up with a better plan. Padawan hovered beside them, optical sensors dimmed to avoid detection. If I may offer a suggestion, sir, your ship is approximately 1.7 kilometers southeast. If we could reach it before they establish a planetary lockdown protocol. They already have, Ami interrupted, her head tilted as though listening to frequencies beyond human perception. 3 orbital destroyers have entered the system, standard Imperium containment formation. How do you know that? Raman demanded. A faint smile touched Ami's lips. The same way I know that 12 Imperial hunters are approaching our position, armed with molecular disruptors calibrated specifically to disintegrate organic matter while preserving artifacts. She tapped her temple. Even after a millennium, some connections remain intact. The Imperial hunters moved with mechanical precision, their armor gleaming obsidian in the fading light. Each stood 2 meters tall, faces hidden behind featureless helmets that reflected the jungle around them. "Those aren't standard Imperial troops," Raman whispered. "No," Ami agreed. "Those are Praetoria Ultima, the Emperor's personal executioners. I created their order originally." Something like nostalgia flickered across her face. "They've maintained their fashion sense at least." "Created?" Raman echoed. "Just who exactly were you?" "There is no time for history lessons," she replied, suddenly alert. "They've detected us." 3 hunters pivoted in perfect synchronization, their weapons trained on the foliage where Raman and Ami hid. "Padawan, distraction protocol," Raman hissed. The drone shot upward through the canopy, emitting a piercing electromagnetic pulse that momentarily disrupted the hunter's systems. In that brief window of disorientation, Raman seized Ami's wrist and they sprinted deeper into the jungle. Disruptor fire sliced through the vegetation behind them, vaporizing ancient trees into clouds of molecular ash. The jungle itself seemed to scream as centuries-old life forms disintegrated. "We can't outrun them," Raman panted, leaping over a fallen trunk. "Who said anything about running?" Ami replied. She stopped abruptly, turning to face their pursuers. "Tempest Pugiandi. Estimated time to fight, are you insane?" Raman grabbed her arm. "There are 12 of them, armed with weapons specifically designed to kill us." Ami's eyes flashed with emerald fire. "There were once 12,000 arrayed against me at the Battle of Anaraz. None survived." She gently removed his hand from her arm. "Besides, I need to test the limits of my powers after such a long slumber. What better opportunity?" Before Raman could protest further, she stepped forward, arms extended outward. The very air around her began to shimmer, as though reality itself was bending to her will. The ground beneath her feet cracked in a perfect circle, luminous energy seeping through the fissures. "Venit ad me interfector," she called, her voice carrying unnaturally through the jungle. "Come to me, killers." The hunters emerged from the undergrowth, weapons raised. Their leader stepped forward, helmet retracting to reveal a face that was barely human, more machine than flesh, with glowing optical implants where eyes should be. "Ami da Azria," the leader intoned, voice metallic and cold. "By Imperial Decree XK 7734, you are sentenced to eternal containment. Resistance will result in permanent termination." "How formal," Ami replied, a dangerous smile playing across her lips. "And the human? What is his crime?" "Interference with an Imperial artifact." "Sentence, death." "Ah." She nodded as if this confirmed something. "Then allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Ami da Azria, Empress of Stars, creator of the Imperium, and this," she reached back to take Raman's hand, "is my consort. Harm him, and I will ensure that your precious Imperium burns from the inside out." Padawan hovered anxiously above. "Sir, may I point out that antagonizing heavily armed Imperial executioners rarely ends well in my statistical analyses." The hunter commander raised his weapon. "Your delusions of grandeur are noted. Artifact compliance will make your containment process less painful." Ami's laughter rang out, clear and sharp as crystal breaking. "Compliance was never my forte." She moved with sudden, blinding speed, her hand slicing through the air in a gesture that seemed almost casual. The hunter commander's weapon, and the arm holding it, separated from his body in a spray of hydraulic fluid and synthetic blood. Before the others could react, she had already closed the distance to the next 2 hunters, moving like a deadly dancer between them. Where her hands touched armor crumpled like paper. Raman stood transfixed, unable to reconcile the elegant, flirtatious woman with this efficient killing machine. 3 hunters lay incapacitated in the span of seconds, and she hadn't even broken a sweat. The remaining hunters regrouped, forming a defensive circle and unleashing a barrage of disruptor fire. Ami raised her hand, and the deadly energy beams simply stopped midair, hanging suspended like deadly light sculptures before dissolving into harmless particles. Pueri cum ludicrous, she muttered. Children with toys. With a gesture that reminded Raman of a conductor leading an orchestra, she lifted the entire group of hunters into the air. Their armor creaked and groaned under invisible pressure. You will return to your masters, she announced. And deliver a message. Tell them the Jade Empress has awakened, and she remembers their betrayal. Tell them I have taken a new consort from among the humans, and through him I will reclaim what is mine. Her voice deepened, resonating with power. Tell them I am coming. She flicked her wrist, and the hunters were hurled through the air, crashing into the distant jungle with bone-breaking force. Raman stared at her, mouth agape. That was not what I expected. Ami turned to him, the dangerous aura receding, replaced by the warmth she seemed to reserve only for him. What did you expect, me Amatis? That I would cower and flee? I expected us both to die, he admitted. Or at the very least to engage in a desperate running battle with slim chances of survival. There will be time for desperate battles later, she promised, her hand caressing his cheek. For now, we should seek better shelter. More will come. Padawan descended from his elevated position. If I may interrupt this, whatever this is, my sensors indicate the Imperial ship is preparing to deploy orbital bombardment protocols. In approximately 7 minutes, this entire region will be reduced to its component atoms. Raman's survival instinct kicked back into gear. My ship. It's not far, but we'll never outrun the bombardment on foot. We won't need to run, Ami said. Do you trust me, Nightingale? The question hung in the air between them. Trust her. He'd known her for less than an hour. She'd just casually dismantled elite Imperial troops, claimed to be the creator of the very Imperium that now hunted them, and declared him her consort without so much as asking. Trust was a big word. And yet. Yes, he found himself saying. God help me, but yes. Her smile was radiant. She stepped close to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. Hold tight to me. And your floating servant as well. Technically, I'm an advanced artificial intelligence with autonomous, Padawan began. Padawan, just get over here, Raman interrupted, grabbing the drone and pulling it close. Ami closed her eyes in concentration. The air around them began to vibrate, molecules oscillating at increasing frequencies. Raman felt a peculiar sensation, as though his very atoms were loosening their connection to each other. Transfer nos, she whispered. The world dissolved. For an instant that felt like eternity, Raman existed everywhere and nowhere, spread across dimensions, experiencing every possible version of himself simultaneously. Then, with a sensation like being snapped back by an elastic band, he solidified again. They stood beside his ship, the Nightjar, a modified Corvette-class smuggler vessel that had seen better days but had never let him down. What, how did you, he stammered, steadying himself against the hull. Quantum entanglement manipulation, Ami explained casually. All matter is connected at the subatomic level. I simply reminded our particles that they could be elsewhere. Padawan systems rebooted with a series of chaotic beeps. That was most unpleasant. My positronic matrix was temporarily experiencing existence in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Also, sir, we have approximately 4 minutes before orbital bombardment. Raman shook off his disorientation and pressed his palm against the Nightjar's identification panel. The entry ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss. All aboard, he called, hurrying Ami inside. The ship's interior was cramped but functional, a cockpit designed for 2, a small common area, cargo hold, and a single cabin. Raman slid into the pilot's seat, hands flying over the controls. Engine ignition sequence initiated, Padawan announced, plugging into the ship's systems. 3 minutes to bombardment. Ami examined the cockpit with undisguised curiosity. Your vessels have become much smaller since my time. And less grandiose. This isn't exactly a royal flagship, Raman muttered, focused on the startup sequence. It's a smuggler ship, designed for speed and stealth, not grandeur. The engines roared to life just as the first orbital strikes began hitting the jungle, creating expanding rings of devastation. Raman pulled back on the controls and the nightjar leapt skyward, buffeted by shock waves from the explosions. Holding structural integrity at 92%, Padawan reported. Imperial destroyers have locked targeting systems on us. Of course they have, Raman gritted, executing a series of evasive maneuvers that strained both the ship and its occupants. Any suggestions, divine wife? Ami closed her eyes, concentrating. I cannot affect vessels at orbital distances. Not yet. My powers are still regenerating. Disruptor beams sliced through the atmosphere around them as the nightjar climbed higher, the blue sky gradually darkening to the black of space. The Imperial destroyers loomed ahead, massive wedge-shaped vessels bristling with weapons. Padawan, stealth protocols, Raman ordered, diving beneath the closest destroyer, engaging electromagnetic dampening and thermal masking. The drone responded, though I calculate a 72% probability they will still detect our engine signature. Then we'll just have to be unpredictable, Raman muttered, executing a maneuver that sent them spiraling between two destroyers, using their mass to shield the nightjar from the third vessel's sensors. Ami watched him with growing admiration. You pilot as though you were born to it. I was, he replied, not taking his eyes off the controls. My father was an Imperial Navy commander before he retired. A shadow crossed Ami's face. Imperial Navy? Then your lineage. Can we discuss family history when we're not being shot at? Raman interrupted as proximity alarms blared. Padawan, we need a jump vector. Calculating optimal trajectories, the drone replied. May I suggest the Paragus Nebula? Its ionized gases would provide excellent sensor coverage. Locked in, Raman confirmed, hands dancing across the navigational array. Preparing for hyperspace jump in 3, 2. The nightjar shuddered as a disruptor beam grazed its starboard side. Warning lights flashed across the console. Starboard stabilizer damaged, Padawan announced. Hyperspace calculations compromised. Just get us out of here. Raman shouted, punching the hyperspace initiator despite the warnings. Stars stretched to infinity as the ship lurched into hyperspace, the fabric of reality bending around them. The violent entry sent them tumbling through the cabin, alarms blaring as the damaged stabilizer struggled to maintain their course. After several nauseating minutes, the nightjar emerged into normal space, trailing sparks and vapor from its wounded side. Where are we? Raman asked, regaining his feet and checking the navigation systems. Approximately 17 light-years from our departure point, Padawan reported. We appear to be in the vicinity of the Chus system. Uninhabited, but there is a small moon with breathable atmosphere where we could effect repairs. Raman guided the limping vessel toward the blue-green moon that hung before them, an oasis in the emptiness of space. Its surface was dominated by ancient eroded temple complexes similar to the one they'd left on Zendora. Interesting, Ami murmured, studying the moon through the viewscreen. This was once an outpost of my people. A sanctuary of the Stelli Custodia, the Star Guardians. Your people had outposts everywhere? Raman asked, initiating the landing sequence. We were extensive in our reach, she replied carefully. Before the betrayal. The nightjar settled onto an ancient landing platform, engines powering down with a series of protesting whines. Beyond the ship, the ruins of what must have once been a magnificent complex stretched into the distance, illuminated by the light of a gas giant that dominated the sky. Raman slumped in his seat, the adrenaline of their escape finally wearing off. So we're safe for now. Perhaps this would be a good time for that history lesson. Ami nodded slowly. Yes. But first, I need to know something, Raman Kane. Her emerald eyes fixed on his with unsettling intensity. Your father was Imperial Navy. His bloodline, it must contain traces of the original Imperial houses. Raman shifted uncomfortably. My father claimed our family descended from some ancient admiral. Never put much stock in it myself. What was his name? This admiral ancestor. Cassius, I think. Cassius Valerius. Why does it matter? Ami's expression froze. Cassius Valerius was not an admiral. He was my first general. My most trusted advisor. Her voice hardened. And the architect of my betrayal. The cabin temperature seemed to drop several degrees. You're saying I'm descended from the man who betrayed you? Raman asked carefully. It explains how you could awaken me, she said, eyes never leaving his face. The seal was keyed to specific genetic markers. Only one of the bloodline who imprisoned me could release me, a failsafe in case they ever needed my power again. Her hand moved to his throat with lightning speed, fingers pressing against his pulse point. I could end you right now, descendant of Cassius. Your ancestors' blood flows in your veins, blood that deserves to be spilled for 1,000 years of imprisonment. Raman didn't flinch. If you wanted me dead, I'd be dead already. A tense moment stretched between them, Padawan hovering nervously nearby, weapon systems quietly charging. Then, to Raman's shock, Ami threw back her head and laughed, a genuine, musical sound that transformed her face from menacing to radiant. O stultus homo, she said, releasing his throat to caress his cheek instead. O foolish man. Do you think I didn't know from the moment I awakened? I sensed Cassius's blood in you. You knew. Raman sputtered. And you didn't kill me immediately because... Because, my nightingale, she said softly, when you looked at me, you did not see a weapon to be wielded or a tyrant to be feared. You saw a woman. You desired me for myself, not for my power. Her smile turned mischievous. Also, you have a much better sense of humor than your ancestor. Cassius was dreadfully serious about everything. Padawan's weapon systems powered down. Sir, I believe this qualifies as what humans call a relationship red flag, specifically the test's partner with death threats variety. Raman ignored the drone, still processing Ami's revelation. So my ancestor imprisoned you, and now I freed you. Where does that leave us? Bound, she replied simply. By ancient law, by cosmic irony, and by choice. Your blood may have been necessary to break the seal, but it was your voice, your spirit that called to me through the millennia. She leaned closer, her jade skin luminous in the cabin's low light. The question now is what we do with this bond. Well, Raman said, a ghost of his usual rakish smile returning, usually when I'm married to a woman I've known for less than a day, I at least try to learn her favorite color before we start discussing overthrowing galactic empires. Ami laughed again. Emerald. Like my skin, like my homeworld's twin suns at dawn. She glanced out the viewscreen at the temple ruins. And speaking of bonds, there is a sacred place here where we could perform the proper rituals to strengthen ours. The Temple of Celestial Union stands at the center of this complex. Rituals? Raman asked skeptically. Nothing alarming, she assured him. Simply a formal acknowledgement of what has already begun between us. A protection, should my enemies attempt to use you against me. Padawan interjected, Sir, the ship requires approximately 7 hours of repairs before we can safely return to hyperspace. Might I suggest using this time productively rather than engaging in questionable alien marriage ceremonies? The rituals will provide protection not only for Raman but for his mechanical servant as well, Ami added. The Imperium will not stop hunting us. They will bring resources you cannot imagine to bear against us. Raman considered his options, which realistically were limited. He was stranded on an abandoned moon with a self-proclaimed goddess who claimed to be the original creator of the Imperium that ruled the known galaxy with an iron fist, the same goddess who was, according to ancient laws he didn't understand, now his wife. And strangely, he wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. All right, Raman decided. Let's see this temple of yours. But Padawan stays with us. We'll need advanced warning if the Imperium tracks us here. Ami nodded, satisfaction clear in her expression. As you wish, my nightingale. She leaned forward and pressed her lips briefly to his, a kiss that sent electric currents racing through his body. Nunc incipit verum iter nostrum, now our true journey begins. Raman stepped out of the nightjar's hatch, the ancient air of the abandoned moon filling his lungs. The ruins stretched before them like the skeleton of a once mighty civilization, haunting yet beautiful under the gas giant's ethereal light. Ami led him through crumbling archways and overgrown courtyards, her steps confident despite the millennium that had passed since she'd last walked these paths. Padawan hovered protectively nearby, sensors continuously scanning for threats. The Temple of Celestial Union, Ami announced as they entered a circular chamber. Despite the erosion of time, its magnificence remained. Crystalline columns captured the distant starlight, refracting it into patterns that danced across the floor. At the center stood a raised dais with two shallow depressions. What happens here exactly? Raman asked, watching as Ami circled the chamber, touching ancient symbols that illuminated at her touch. We join, she said simply. Mind, spirit, essence. It will create a tether between us that not even death can sever. Raman raised an eyebrow. That sounds intense for a first date. She smiled, approaching him with predatory grace. Are you afraid, descendant of Cassis? Terrified, he admitted with surprising honesty. But not of the ritual. Her expression softened. What then? Of wanting this, he confessed. Of wanting you, despite every logical reason I should be running in the opposite direction. Padawan interrupted tactfully. Sir, perimeter sensors indicate no pursuit at present. However, I should return to the ship to monitor repairs. I'll leave you to your bonding activities. As the drone departed, Ami took Raman's hands. In antiquis temporibus in nullum them, she whispered. From ancient times into new hope. The ritual was simpler than Raman had feared, no blood sacrifice or arcane torture. They stood facing each other on the dais, their hands linked while Ami spoke words in her ancient tongue that somehow Raman understood in his soul if not his mind. The chamber's light converged around them, sinking into their skin, weaving invisible connections between them. When it ended, Raman felt her presence in his mind, not intrusive, but comforting, like the awareness of a star that warms you even when you're not looking at it. Is that it? He asked. Are we, whatever we are now? United, she confirmed, her eyes luminous. But there is one more tradition to honor. She drew him close, and this time when their lips met, it felt like stars colliding. The kiss deepened, centuries of loneliness and longing pouring from her into him, his own lifetime of keeping everyone at arm's length crumbling in the face of her fierce devotion. Later, aboard the nightjar as Padawan discreetly occupied himself with repairs in the engine room, Raman and Ami explored their new bond in more physical ways, her jade skin against his, her whispered Latin endearments, the way she claimed him as hers. It transcended mere physical pleasure. In her arms, Raman found something he'd never allowed himself to seek, belonging. As they lay entwined in the narrow confines of his cabin, the ship safely hidden from Imperial sensors by the moon's magnetic field, Ami traced the line of his jaw with her fingertip. What happens now? He murmured against her hair. War, she replied softly. Revolution. Vengeance. But not tonight. She pressed her lips to his chest where his heart beat strongly. Tonight we are simply Ami and Raman, finding each other across the impossibility of time. Beyond the viewport, stars glittered like promises. Whatever morning would bring, imperial hunters, ancient conflicts, galaxy-spanning conspiracies, for this moment, they were sheltered in each other's arms, two wanderers who had found an unexpected home. Padawan's voice came through the ship's intercom, breaking their reverie. "Sir, long-range sensors are detecting multiple vessels entering the system. Their quantum signatures match known imperial configurations." Ami sat up, her skin taking on a subtle glow. "They're earlier than expected. The architect must be desperate." "The architect?" Raman asked, reaching for his clothes. "The true power behind the imperial throne. A being who has ruled from the shadows since my imprisonment." Her eyes narrowed. "I sense something familiar about their essence." The ship's sensors blared a warning as a massive vessel dropped out of hyperspace directly above them, unlike anything Raman had ever seen. It resembled a cathedral more than a warship, its architecture a blend of ancient and modern that spoke of millennia of technological evolution. A transmission cut through their communications, overriding all encryption. A face appeared on the view screen that made Raman's blood run cold. It could have been his own reflection, aged by centuries, with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. "Welcome home, Empress," the man said, his voice carrying the weight of ages. "And welcome, Raman Kane, last scion of Cassius Valerius, finally returned to the fold." Ami's hand found Raman's, squeezing it tightly. "Remember," she whispered. "Whatever happens next, whatever he claims. I choose you, not the past he offers." Through their newly forged bond, Raman felt the truth of her words, the strength of her commitment. Whatever came next, whatever ancient games were being played, whatever destiny had in store, they would face it together. The Nightjar's engines hummed to life as they prepared to confront the architect of 1,000 years of history, and to forge a new future from the ashes of ancient betrayals. In the artificial gravity of the ship, the tear of infinity floated between them, its swirling galaxies seeming to pulse in rhythm with their joined hearts. For the first time in his life, Raman understood that some treasures were worth more than all the riches in the universe. He had come seeking an artifact and found a goddess. He had meant to steal a crystal and instead had his heart stolen in return. Now, as they faced an enemy who had shaped galactic history from the shadows, Raman knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't have it any other way. "Well then, divine wife," he said with a roguish grin, "shall we go make history?" Ami's answering smile was fierce and beautiful. "Together, my nightingale. Always together." Padawan's lights flickered in what might have been resignation. "I suppose this means we're about to do something statistically inadvisable." "Oh yes," Raman confirmed, plotting a course toward the massive vessel above. "But then again, the best stories always are." The Nightjar rose from the ancient temple grounds, carrying its unlikely crew toward their destiny. Behind them, the Temple of Celestial Union pulsed with renewed power, as though awakening from its own long slumber. Above, the stars beckoned with infinite possibilities, and the promise of adventures yet to come.